Have you ever stumbled upon a tale so absurd that it seems that God himself must be laughing? Such is the curious case of the Quran, a revelation of Allah. The Quran contains a peculiar warning reserved for a false prophet. But the true twist lies not in the warning itself, but in its fulfillment. For Muhammad, the very founder of Islam, met his end in the precise manner foretold in the Quran. And if that weren't enough, consider this. Nestled within the same text that curses Muhammad, there emerges a glorification of Jesus, a man who subverts everything Muhammad's doctrine stands for. To unravel this tangled mess, we must delve into the murky depths of Islamic theology and the history of Islam that Muslims would rather avoid like a plague of lice. We will look at the contrasting fates of Muhammad and Jesus, one the false prophet and the other the true word of Allah, destined for eternal glory. What lies ahead is a journey through the absurd and the divine. So, let's get into it. The Muslims insist that the Quran is the eternal and uncreated word of Allah. They proclaim that this word existed long before the heavens and the earth were created. Allah eagerly wanted to share his pearls of wisdom with the humble creatures he has made and guide his creations into slavish devotion, binding them forever to his will. But there is a rather inconvenient wrinkle in Allah's grand plan. This God is so staggeringly powerful that he is incapable of entering his own creation, leaving him locked out of the universe he designed. Allah, therefore, is unable to deliver the message himself. But fear not, for he had devised a cunning solution. At his disposal is a host of angels. The very word angel means messenger. These servants can descend to the earthly realm with Allah's word and entrust this message to mortals, who in turn become messengers on earth. And here enters Muhammad, proclaiming himself a messenger of Allah, reciting the words delivered to him by the angel Gabriel. The Quran is a patchwork of these revelations, recited by Muhammad and later bound into books by his loyal companions. So picture the scene. It is the early 7th century, and Muhammad, gripped by the grand delusion of being a prophet, speaking before the crowds of Mecca. The pagan inhabitants of the city, skeptical of Muhammad's divine credentials, greet his proclamations with derision, dismissing them as nothing more than the tales of ancient times. To bolster his audacious claims with an air of divine authority, Muhammad declares the following verses, presenting them as the eternal and uncreated words of Allah. Indeed, it is the word of a noble messenger, and it is not the word of a poet. It is a revelation from the Lord of the worlds. And if he had made up about us some sayings, we would have seized him by the right hand. Then we would have cut from him the aorta. Aorta being the main and largest artery in the human body. So, if Muhammad fabricates the divine word, Allah's punishment would descend upon him. And if you observe closely, this punishment is strikingly specific. The false prophet would be seized by the right hand and his life artery will be cut. Now, here comes the curious part. The events leading up to Muhammad's demise mirror this very prophecy, almost word for word. Muhammad did not die of old age, nor in the heat of battle drenched in glory. The Quran doesn't describe his death. In order to get the complete picture, we must turn to the hadiths, or chronicles of revelations, rules, and Muhammad's various escapades. These oral teachings were recorded by various Islamic scholars over the centuries and compiled into books of hadiths that Muslims follow to this day. One such authentic record comes from Muhammad's wife, who witnessed the final days of Muhammad's life. This is what she said. The Prophet in his ailment, in which he died, used to say, "I still feel the pain caused by the food I ate at Khaybar, and at this time, I feel as if my aorta is being cut from that poison." Did you catch what Muhammad said as he was dying? He claimed that his aorta is being cut off, exactly what Allah had foretold would happen to a false prophet. It seems that in the delirium of his final moments, Muhammad lost all memory of the prophecy he had recited in Mecca, or perhaps he had exposed the truth about himself without realizing it. But wait a minute, the defenders of Islam will object. Something doesn't quite add up. The Quran clearly states that Allah would seize a false prophet by his right hand, and this did not happen to Muhammad. So this prophecy is not about him. And at this point, that we must look deeper into Muhammad's life and examine what happened to him in Khaybar. Throughout his illustrious career, Muhammad embarked on a noble crusade to drive the Jews and Christians out of Arabia, laying waste to all who dared oppose him, and spreading the peaceful message of Islam with a sword. One such campaign took place in the region of Khaybar, once home to a thriving Jewish community. Under the leadership of Muhammad, the Muslims set out to subdue the Jews and place the region under the rule of Islam. The invasion proved successful, and after the battle had ended, the Jews, eager to celebrate their newfound bondage, decided to arrange a feast for their Muslim overlords. And so, after the preparations, a Jewish woman presented a fine mutton dish, discreetly lacing it with poison. Being a brilliant strategist and profound thinker, Muhammad saw no harm in eating the food made by people he had just fought and slaughtered. He tucked into the meal, but it wasn't long before he noticed that the food was poisoned. The Jewish woman was interrogated and quickly confessed to her intentions. But Muhammad dismissed the entire incident, telling the woman that Allah will never give you the power to do it. But the poison he consumed had a rather different plan. Over the next 4 years, it did its work, slowly unraveling Muhammad's once mighty body. His inevitable march toward death must have been drawn out and riddled with prolonged suffering. And so, in 632 AD, Muhammad succumbed at last, his life artery gradually torn apart. But what does all of this have to do with Allah's promise to seize a false prophet by his right hand, you may ask? The answer lies hidden within the very same hadiths that recount these stories. It is in these writings that we also find detailed instructions on the eating practices of the Muslims. Over and over, Muhammad insists that Muslims must eat food with their right hand. By eating the poisoned meal with his right hand, Muhammad unwittingly sealed his fate, fulfilling to the letter the grim prophecy he had proclaimed all those years ago. His demise became the very judgment he had invoked, a fitting end for the lies he dared to spread in the name of God. And while Allah condemns Muhammad as a false prophet, the Quran exalts Jesus, the true pinnacle of greatness in Islam, a living word of Allah and His Spirit, pure and sinless, untouched by the flaws that tainted Muhammad. The Quran tells us of his miracles that the founder of Islam could only dream of performing. Jesus spoke in his cradle, knew the unseen, raised the dead, healed the sick, and created life with his breath alone. And when his work was done, Allah took Jesus up above the heavens, where he remains alive to this day. And Jesus will return, descending once more to begin the judgment day, not as a mere man, but as the just judge of all. In Islam, Jesus is honored not just as a prophet, but as one of the greatest, most miraculous men ever to walk the earth. And what of Muhammad, you ask? Oh, that's right, he was poisoned by a Jew and died like a false prophet, never to return again.